The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floors, its walls displaying the heraldry of 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes as he reviewed the day's agenda on his neural interface. Another routine session of galactic politics, trade disputes, and territorial negotiations. Nothing that would require his full attention. "Next item," announced the council speaker, her voice echoing through translation matrices to accommodate the dozens of species present. "Application for membership consideration from the species known as humans, from the planet Earth in the Sol system." A ripple of what could generously be called mild interest passed through the assembled delegates. Most continued their private conversations or reviewed other matters on their personal devices. The humans had been trying to gain council attention for nearly 50 years now, sending increasingly desperate diplomatic missions to the Outer Rim colonies, hoping someone would sponsor their application. Zethkar barely glanced up from his trade reports. The Vorthak Empire controlled shipping lanes across 17 systems, and quarterly profits were down by 2%. That was far more pressing than whatever these humans wanted. From what little he knew, they were a young species from a backwater system, barely 2 centuries into space travel. They had managed to colonize a few worlds in their local cluster, but nothing impressive by galactic standards. The humans have submitted extensive documentation regarding their technological capabilities, cultural achievements, and potential contributions to galactic society, the speaker continued, her tone suggesting she was reading from a very long and very boring document. Delegate Mordun of the Silicon Collective let out what passed for a laugh among his crystalline people. "Another primitive species thinking they're ready for the big leagues? What do they have to offer? Crude chemical rockets and basic fusion reactors?" Their submission indicates they've developed something called internet culture, and claim to have revolutionary approaches to problem-solving, the speaker replied, though her multiple eyes suggested she found this as unimpressive as everyone else. "Problem-solving," scoffed Ambassador Yilnara from the Ethereal Consortium. "Every species thinks their approach is revolutionary. The Zephyrians thought their hive-mind consensus was the future. The Keltorians believed their quantum probability decision matrices would change everything. Now look at them. Minor trading partners at best." Zethkar finally looked up from his reports, mildly curious despite himself. "What's their population?" "Approximately 8 billion on their homeworld, with another 2 billion spread across their 12 colony worlds," the speaker read from the submission. 12 colonies in 2 centuries? That's actually not terrible for a new species, admitted Delegate Torvash from the Mechanist Union. "Though their expansion rate suggests limited faster-than-light capabilities." "Limited is generous," Yilnara interjected. "They're probably using some variant of Alcubierre drives or crude wormhole generation. Messy, inefficient, dangerous. Most species abandon those approaches once they discover proper dimensional folding." The discussion continued in this vein for several more minutes. The humans were deemed unremarkable. Not primitive enough to be concerning, not advanced enough to be useful. They fell into that vast middle category of species that the Council acknowledged existed but rarely thought about. Like the benthic clans of Hydros 7th or the tree singers of Verdant Prime, they would probably submit applications every few decades, be politely declined, and eventually give up or find some minor niche in galactic society. "Motion to defer consideration pending technological advancement," Delegate Mordun proposed, which was the polite way of saying, "Ask us again in a few hundred years when you might have something interesting to offer." "Seconded," came the immediate response from 3 different delegates. But before the vote could proceed, Junior Delegate Cassera from the Void Watchers raised a tentacle. "If I may, honored colleagues, there are some unusual elements in their submission that warrant brief discussion." Zethkar suppressed a sigh. Kesara was young for her species, barely 800 years old, and still had that annoying tendency to read every document thoroughly instead of skimming for the important bits like a proper diplomat. The humans claim to have fought something they call total war multiple times in their history, with conflicts involving their entire planetary population. They also mention surviving several extinction-level events, including what they term nuclear standoff that lasted for decades. Nuclear standoff? Torvash's mechanical voice carried a note of skepticism. They developed nuclear weapons before achieving stable global governance. That's usually a species-ending combination. According to their records, they came close to extinction several times but pulled back each time. They also survived natural disasters including asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and multiple ice ages without technological assistance. Impressive, Yilnara conceded grudgingly, but survival isn't the same as contribution to galactic civilization. The survivor clans of Hades III have endured in environments that would kill most species instantly, but they've contributed nothing to the broader galaxy except cautionary tales about planetary colonization. Kesara's tentacles rippled in what her species used to indicate persistence. There's something else. Their military doctrine section includes references to something called asymmetric warfare and detailed case studies of smaller forces defeating larger, more technologically advanced opponents. They seem to have made an art form of fighting enemies who should, by all logic, defeat them easily. Every species has war stories, Zethkar said dismissively, though something about the phrase asymmetric warfare nagged at him. The Keltorians claim their probability wars changed the nature of reality itself. The Zephyrians insist their unity conflicts transcended the concept of victory and defeat. Historical hyperbole is universal. Perhaps, Kesara admitted, but their submission includes actual tactical analyses and mathematical models. Their approach to conflict seems unusually creative. They describe scenarios where they deliberately choose unfavorable conditions to gain psychological advantages over their opponents. Psychological warfare is hardly unique, Mordun pointed out. The Ethereals have been using mental manipulation in combat for millennia. Not manipulation, motivation. They seem to fight harder when the odds are against them. There's a term they use repeatedly, David and Goliath scenarios. Small, apparently outmatched forces finding unexpected ways to overcome overwhelming opposition. The chamber fell quiet for a moment as delegates processed this information. In a galaxy where most conflicts were resolved through technological superiority, economic pressure, or diplomatic maneuvering, the idea of deliberately seeking unfavorable odds seemed illogical. Irrelevant for galactic membership, Zethkar concluded. We're not looking for warrior species. We have the Caraxian Horde for that. We need contributors to galactic technology, culture, and prosperity. Agreed, the speaker announced. Motion to defer still stands. All in favor? The vote was unanimous, though Kesara hesitated for a fraction of a second longer than protocol usually allowed. The humans would be politely informed that their application had been reviewed and found premature. They were encouraged to reapply in a few centuries once they had made more significant technological or cultural advances. After the session, as delegates filed out to attend various receptions and private meetings, Kesara lingered near the viewing screens that displayed real-time feeds from across the galaxy. Trade routes pulsed with cargo ships, diplomatic vessels traveled between alliance worlds, and the great machines of galactic civilization hummed along in their established patterns. Somewhere out there, in a small system that barely registered on most star charts, 8 billion humans were going about their daily lives, unaware that they had just been dismissed by the most powerful political body in the galaxy. They would continue their modest expansion, their creative problem-solving, their seemingly contradictory nature of being both individually fragile and collectively resilient. Cassara had spent her mandatory education cycles studying the patterns of galactic history. Species rose and fell, empires expanded and contracted, and the galaxy continued its slow evolution toward greater complexity and cooperation. But something about the humans felt different. Not necessarily important. The galaxy was full of unique species that never amounted to much on the larger stage, but different nonetheless. She made a mental note to monitor their development through the Void Watchers' deep space observation networks, not because she expected them to become significant players in galactic politics, but because she had learned to trust her instincts about unusual patterns. In a universe where the unexpected rarely happened, the humans had managed to surprise her simply by surviving circumstances that should have destroyed them. Perhaps, she thought as she finally left the chamber, that was worth paying attention to. Back in the Sol system, completely unaware of their rejection by the Galactic Council, humanity continued its steady expansion into the cosmos. Research stations pushed deeper into space, colony ships searched for new worlds, and in laboratories across human space, scientists and engineers worked on problems that no one else in the galaxy had thought to solve. They remained overlooked by everyone and feared by no one. For now. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the tactical display with growing unease. 3 months ago, the Vorthak Empire had issued what they called a trade compliance notice to all human colonies. In plain English, it was a demand for tribute disguised as a protection fee. When humanity had politely declined, the Vorthak had decided to make an example of the agricultural world of Harvest Prime. "Status report," Chen ordered, her voice cutting through the tension that filled the bridge. "Vorthak invasion fleet is maintaining position in high orbit," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the sensor station. 47 vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts. They've deployed orbital bombardment platforms around the planet and established a blockade. Chen studied the numbers on her personal display. The human fleet defending Harvest Prime consisted of 18 ships, most of them converted cargo vessels with hastily mounted weapons. By every measure of galactic naval doctrine, this was hopeless. The Vorthak had superior numbers, better weapons, stronger shields, and centuries more experience in space warfare. "They're broadcasting surrender terms," Communications Officer Park announced. "Standard Vorthak occupation protocols, complete submission to imperial authority, tribute payments, forced labor quotas, and transfer of all advanced technology." "How long before the Galactic Council responds to our formal complaint?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Ethereal Consortium expressed deep concern and called for measured diplomatic solutions, Park replied, reading from the latest transmission. "The Silicon Collective suggested we find mutually beneficial accommodation with our galactic neighbors. The Mechanist Union offered to mediate talks in 6 months when their diplomats finish their current trade negotiations. In other words, humanity was on its own, just like always." Chen had spent 15 years in the Colonial Defense Forces, working her way up from a junior navigation officer to admiral of the home fleet. She had studied every major galactic conflict in recorded history, analyzing the tactics, strategies, and outcomes that shaped the current balance of power. What she had discovered was that galactic warfare followed predictable patterns based on technological supremacy and numerical advantage. Species fought like chess grandmasters, carefully calculating force ratios, technological advantages, and economic costs. Wars were usually decided before the first shot was fired, based on objective analysis of comparative capabilities. The stronger force won, terms were negotiated, and the galaxy continued its orderly expansion. But humans had never been particularly good at following other people's rules. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she announced on the fleet-wide channel. "Execute Protocol Omega. I repeat, all ships execute Protocol Omega immediately. On dozens of bridges throughout the human fleet, captains began issuing orders that would have seemed insane to any galactic military observer. Ships powered down their main engines and entered what appeared to be complete shutdown mode. Life support systems switched to minimum power. Weapons systems went offline. To any external scanner, the human fleet had just surrendered without firing a shot. The Vorthak responded exactly as Chen had hoped they would. Admiral Zethkar, commanding the invasion fleet from his flagship Domination's Edge, sent a brief message congratulating the humans on their wisdom in recognizing superior force. Vorthak boarding parties would arrive within the hour to formalize the surrender and begin cataloging human assets for Imperial use. Phase 2 in 30 minutes, Chen announced quietly. What the Vorthak didn't know, because no species in galactic history had ever tried it, was that humans had spent decades developing something they called dead man switches, automated systems that could operate independently of main ship functions. Hidden throughout the human fleet were thousands of tiny, virtually undetectable devices that had been quietly mapping every detail of the Vorthak formation since the standoff began. More importantly, the human ships weren't actually powered down. They had simply rerouted all energy signatures through specially designed dampening systems that made them appear dead to conventional sensors. It was a technology that served no apparent purpose in normal galactic warfare, where honorable combat between evenly matched fleets was the established norm. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules of the game entirely. Vorthak boarding shuttles launching, Rodriguez reported. 43 craft heading for our position. Let them come, Chen replied. All ships maintain radio silence and hold position. Aboard the Vorthak shuttles, Imperial Marines prepared for what they expected to be a routine occupation. Their intelligence briefings had described humans as a typical carbon-based species with standard physiological capabilities and conventional military doctrine. Nothing in their files suggested any unusual tactical innovations or strategic surprises. The first hint that something was wrong came when the boarding parties docked with human ships and found them filled with a strange, sweet-smelling gas that made their environmental suits issue contamination warnings. The second hint came when they realized that every door, corridor, and access panel had been booby-trapped with devices that didn't kill, but made movement slow, difficult, and disorienting. "What are they doing?" Zethkar demanded as reports flooded in from his boarding teams. "Are they trying to poison our Marines?" "Negative, Admiral," his tactical officer replied, confusion evident even through the translator matrix. "The gas appears to be some kind of recreational inhalant. Our Marines report feeling dizzy but not injured, and the traps seem designed to annoy rather than kill." "This makes no sense," Zethkar muttered. In 600 years of military service, he had never encountered defensive measures that seemed designed to frustrate rather than destroy. What was the point of non-lethal resistance? He got his answer 15 minutes later when every human ship in the fleet suddenly came alive at once. It wasn't a conventional attack. The humans didn't target the Vorthak ship's weapons or engines or life support systems like any sensible military force would. Instead, they focused everything they had on a single, seemingly impossible objective: preventing the Vorthak fleet from leaving. Thousands of tiny drones launched from hidden bays throughout the human fleet swarmed toward the Vorthak ships. They didn't carry warheads or weapons. They carried industrial adhesives, electromagnetic scramblers, and what humans called really obnoxious malware. Within minutes, every Vorthak vessel found its external sensors covered with rapidly hardening polymer compounds, its communication arrays jammed with signals that played what appeared to be human entertainment programming at maximum volume, and its computer systems infected with viruses that replaced all tactical displays with images of small, furry Earth animals. "This is impossible," Zethkar roared as his flagship's main screen flickered and displayed a continuous loop of what his cultural database identified as kittens playing with balls of yarn. "What kind of military force attacks with adhesive and animal videos?" The answer, though he didn't know it, was a military force that had learned to fight by breaking every rule in the book. While the Vorthak Marines stumbled through human ships trying to figure out why all the walls were covered with what appeared to be lubricant and ball bearings, the human fleet executed the next phase of their plan. They didn't try to destroy the Vorthak ships. That would have been impossible with their inferior firepower. Instead, they began systematically dismantling the invasion fleet piece by piece, using techniques that no galactic military manual had ever contemplated. Cutting beams designed for asteroid mining sliced through shield generators. Industrial fabrication units began producing thousands of tiny robots that swarmed over Vorthak hulls, methodically removing external weapons and sensor arrays. Human engineers, wearing jury-rigged environmental suits, literally walked across the vacuum between ships to manually plant devices that slowly but steadily drained power from Vorthak systems. "Sir," Rodriguez reported with barely controlled amazement, "the Vorthak are trying to retreat, but they can't engage their faster-than-light drives while covered in our adhesive compounds, and their navigation systems keep trying to plot courses to something called the Planet of Really Good Pizza." Chen nodded grimly. "How long until Galactic News Services pick up the story?" "Already happening, Admiral. We're getting requests for interviews from media outlets across 12 different systems. Apparently, footage of Vorthak dreadnoughts being defeated by mining equipment and entertainment programming is unusual enough to attract attention." That was the understated military assessment of the century. Across the galaxy, species that had never heard of humans suddenly found themselves watching tactical recordings that defied every assumption about how space warfare was supposed to work. The images were simultaneously hilarious and deeply unsettling. Mighty Vorthak warships limping away from battle with their hulls covered in graffiti that translated roughly to "Humans were here and have a nice day." But the real shock came 3 hours later, when Admiral Chen opened a communication channel to the entire Vorthak fleet and delivered a message that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. "Admiral Zethkar, this is Admiral Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Your ships are now completely disabled, and your Marines are experiencing what we call tactical inconvenience. We have demonstrated that we can take apart your fleet piece by piece without causing permanent damage to your personnel. However, we would prefer not to continue this embarrassing process. You cannot defeat the Vorthak Empire with these ridiculous tactics," Zethkar replied, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Admiral, we just did. Your fleet is currently held together by duct tape and good intentions, your weapons are offline, and your navigation computers think you're trying to reach a pizza restaurant. But here's what we're offering. You can limp back to Vorthak space and tell your empire that humans are now off-limits for tribute collection. In exchange, we'll provide you with the technical specifications to remove our various modifications to your ships. And if we refuse, then we'll start getting creative. And trust me, Admiral, you really don't want to see what happens when humans start getting creative in combat." The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar staring at tactical displays that had finally stopped showing animal videos and were now displaying a detailed analysis of how thoroughly his fleet had been defeated. Every major system was offline, every weapon was disabled, and his Marines were still wandering through human ships trying to find exits that weren't covered in slippery substances or blocked by rapidly inflating barriers. 6 hours later, the Vorthak fleet limped out of the Harvest Prime system, followed by news drones from 17 different galactic media organizations. By the end of the week, the story had reached every corner of civilized space, a minor species called humans, had defeated one of the galaxy's major military powers using tactics that seemed to have been designed by comedians rather than strategists. Suddenly, humanity was no longer overlooked by everyone, but they still weren't feared by anyone. The galaxy didn't quite know what to make of a species that won battles by making them so ridiculous that continuing to fight became embarrassing. That would change soon enough. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after what the media had dubbed the Harvest Prime Incident. Ambassador Zethkar sat in his assigned seat, his ceremonial robe somehow failing to restore the dignity he had lost when recordings of his flagship covered in human graffiti became the most watched entertainment content in 12-star systems. "The chair recognizes the Vorthak Empire," announced the speaker, her voice carefully neutral despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. Zethkar rose slowly, acutely aware that every delegate in the chamber was watching him with expressions ranging from barely contained amusement to genuine concern. "Honored colleagues, 3 days ago the Vorthak Empire attempted to bring a rogue human colony into compliance with standard tributary protocols. What followed was—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't make him sound completely incompetent. "Unprecedented." "Unprecedented is one word for it," muttered Delegate Morden from the Silicon Collective. "Humiliating is another. The humans employed tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare," Zethkar continued, his voice gaining strength as he shifted into familiar territory of righteous indignation. "They used non-lethal weapons, deployed psychological warfare that bordered on pranks, and showed complete disregard for military honor and tradition. Did they violate any actual laws of war?" asked Delegate Yilnara from the Ethereal Consortium, her mental tendrils flickering with what might have been amusement. Zethkar hesitated. "Well, no. Technically, but their actions fell within the parameters of defensive engagement, but the spirit of galactic military convention was completely ignored," interrupted Junior Delegate Kasara from the Void Watchers, her tentacles rippling with barely contained excitement. "And that's exactly what makes this so significant." The chamber fell silent. In the 3 years since Kasara had been promoted from observer status, she had developed a reputation for analyzing patterns that others missed. Her insights into trade route optimization had prevented 2 minor wars and increased shipping efficiency by 14% across the Outer Rim. "The humans didn't just win a battle," Kasara continued, rising to address the full council. "They demonstrated something we haven't seen in over 2,000 years of galactic history: genuine tactical innovation. Every species in this chamber fights the same way, with minor variations based on technological specialization. We have standardized warfare to the point where outcomes can be predicted with mathematical precision. Standardization brings stability," Delegate Torvash pointed out, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of concern. "Predictable conflicts reduce casualties and economic disruption." "Yes, they do," Kasara agreed, "but they also create vulnerabilities. We've all become so accustomed to fighting according to established patterns that we've forgotten how to adapt when someone changes the rules entirely." "Are you suggesting that these humans represent some kind of military threat?" Zethkar asked, though even he seemed uncertain about the implications of his own question. "I'm suggesting that they represent something we need to take seriously," Kasara replied. 3 months ago, we dismissed their membership application without serious consideration. Now they've demonstrated capabilities that none of our military analysts anticipated or understood. Capabilities like covering warships with glue and showing them videos of small mammals? Morden's crystalline structure resonated with skeptical harmonics. Capabilities like completely neutralizing a superior force through psychological manipulation and technological improvisation, Kasara corrected. "Ambassador Zethkar, how many casualties did your forces sustain?" "None," Zethkar admitted reluctantly. The humans seemed determined to avoid causing permanent harm to our personnel. And how much permanent damage was done to your fleet? Minimal. Most of our systems were disabled but not destroyed. The humans provided detailed instructions for removing their modifications. So they demonstrated the ability to completely defeat a major Imperial fleet while causing virtually no lasting damage and minimal casualties, Kesara summarized. That level of restraint combined with tactical effectiveness suggests a very sophisticated approach to conflict resolution. It suggests they're not serious warriors, Torvash objected. Any species that refuses to kill its enemies cannot be considered a genuine military threat. Unless, Yilnara said slowly, her mental tendrils extending as she processed new implications. They understand something about warfare that we've forgotten. When was the last time any of us fought an enemy who could have destroyed us but chose not to? The question hung in the air like an uncomfortable revelation. Galactic warfare had evolved into a relatively straightforward affair. Superior forces defeated inferior ones, terms were negotiated based on relative capabilities, and the galaxy continued its orderly expansion. The concept of deliberately choosing not to annihilate a defeated enemy was so alien to contemporary thinking that most species had no protocols for dealing with it. "What do we know about human military philosophy?" the speaker asked, her multiple eyes focusing on the data displays surrounding her position. "Very little," Kesara admitted. "But I've been analyzing their historical records since the Harvest Prime incident. Their approach to conflict appears to be based on something they call asymmetric warfare, using unexpected methods to overcome superior opponents." "Every species claims to have superior tactical innovations," Zethkar protested. "Yes, but humans actually seem to practice it. Their historical records document hundreds of conflicts where smaller, less advanced forces defeated larger, more powerful enemies through tactical innovation, psychological manipulation, and sheer determination." "Historical claims can be exaggerated," Morden pointed out. "Except we just watched them do it in real time," Yilnara said quietly. "Against one of our most established military powers." The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber like a wave of cold water. If the humans could defeat the Vorthak Empire using improvised tactics and mining equipment, what could they accomplish with proper military resources and preparation time? "There's something else," Kesara continued, accessing new data on her neural interface. "Since the Harvest Prime incident, 17 different species have contacted human diplomatic missions requesting information about their tactical methods. The benthic clans want to know if human techniques could help them defend against deep-sea raiders. The Tree Singers are interested in applying human psychological warfare to their ongoing border disputes." "You're saying they're sharing their military innovations?" Torvash asked, his mechanical voice carrying notes of surprise. "Apparently. The humans have established something they call the Defensive Innovation Network, a free exchange of tactical information designed to help smaller species defend themselves against larger aggressors." That's... Zethkar struggled to find words for a concept that had no parallel in galactic history. "That's completely contrary to standard military doctrine. Why would they give away strategic advantages?" "Because their strategic philosophy appears to be based on making themselves valuable allies rather than feared enemies," Kesara explained. "Instead of using their innovations to build an empire, they're using them to create a network of mutual defense agreements." "Mutual defense," the speaker repeated thoughtfully. "How many species have joined this network?" 43 and growing. Small powers mostly. But that represents almost 15% of recognized galactic civilizations." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs as delegates tried to process this information. A coalition of minor species sharing military innovations and coordinating defensive strategies was unprecedented. More troubling, it represented a potential shift in the galactic balance of power that none of the major empires had anticipated. "This is unacceptable," Zethkar declared, rising to his full height. "The humans are disrupting established order. They cannot be allowed to continue undermining legitimate imperial authority with these ridiculous tactics." Legitimate imperial authority? Yilnara's mental tendrils flickered with what was definitely amusement now. "You mean like demanding tribute from independent colonies?" "Standard expansion protocols," Zethkar protested. "Every major power has tributary relationships with minor species in their sphere of influence." "Had," Kesara corrected quietly. "Past tense. As of this morning, 7 species have formally withdrawn from tributary agreements with major powers, citing new defensive capabilities acquired through human consultation." The silence that followed was deafening. For over a millennium, galactic politics had operated on the assumption that small species would naturally fall under the protection and authority of larger empires. The idea that minor civilizations might band together and successfully resist imperial expansion was so foreign that most delegates had no framework for understanding it. "What are you recommending?" the speaker asked finally. "Full membership for humanity," Kesara replied without hesitation. "Immediate recognition, full voting rights, and formal acknowledgement of their territorial sovereignty." "Based on what qualifications?" Zethkar demanded. "They've demonstrated nothing except an ability to make war ridiculous." "They've demonstrated an ability to change the fundamental nature of galactic conflict," Kesara shot back. "In 3 months, they've shifted from being completely irrelevant to being the center of the most significant military development in 2,000 years. Whether we admit them to the Council or not, they're already reshaping galactic politics." "And if we refuse?" Toravash asked. "Then we'll be dealing with an increasingly powerful coalition of minor species led by humans who have no formal stake in maintaining galactic stability," Yilnara pointed out. "At least as council members, they'll be bound by our laws and protocols." "Will they?" Mordun wondered aloud. "They've already demonstrated complete disregard for military conventions. What makes us think they'll respect political ones?" "Because," Kesara said with growing conviction, "everything in their historical record suggests they prefer cooperation to conquest. They could have destroyed the Vorthak fleet, but they chose humiliation instead. They could have kept their tactical innovations secret, but they're sharing them freely. This is a species that seems to understand that sustainable power comes from building alliances, not crushing enemies." "Motion for formal vote on human membership," the speaker announced. "All in favor?" The vote was closer than anyone expected. 18 species voted for immediate membership, 15 voted against, and 12 abstained. It wasn't the overwhelming consensus that major decisions usually required, but it was enough to grant humanity full recognition as a galactic civilization. "The motion carries," the speaker announced. "Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities therein." As the session ended and delegates filed out to attend various receptions and private meetings, Zethkar remained in his seat, staring at the display screens that showed real-time feeds from across the galaxy. Trade routes were already shifting as minor species began coordinating their economic policies through the Human Defensive Innovation Network. Scientific exchanges were increasing between human space and dozens of previously isolated civilizations. And somewhere in the depths of human space, engineers and strategists were undoubtedly working on new ways to surprise anyone who threatened the growing coalition of species that no longer feared the major empires. Humanity was no longer overlooked by everyone. They were no longer feared by no one. They had become something entirely new in galactic politics, a species that gained power by giving it away, that won battles by making them too embarrassing to continue, and that built empires by convincing others they didn't need emperors. In systems across the galaxy, military academies began updating their curricula to include courses on asymmetric tactical innovation, and psychological warfare applications. Intelligence services started monitoring human space with new interest, trying to understand how a species that had been dismissed 3 months earlier had become the focal point of a potential revolution in galactic politics. And in the Sol system, Admiral Sarah Chen received a message from the Galactic Council informing her that humanity had been granted full membership and inviting her to serve as their military liaison. She read the message twice, then called her staff together to plan their response to the galaxy's newest challenge, figuring out how to be a major power without acting like one. The humans had roared back, all right, but their roar sounded like laughter. And that was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all.